Thanks, Claire. Thank you for making time in your crowded agenda for me. I appreciate it very much. Everyone, I'm Greg Weykamp with Edgewater Resources. I recognize many of you, and I'm sure I'll see more of you as we proceed. Just wanted to bring you an update. We've got 15 minutes. You'll keep me on track. 15-minute update. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just use the question outline as sort of an outline for presentation to just give you as much feedback as I can tonight. So the first thing I didn't ask about here, but I did want to cover is on schedule. The project is on schedule. We're about to close on the LDA, the Land Disposition Agreement. We can go into that in more detail, but that's out for signatures right now. The final papers, I think, are coming. Steve Golding's here with the city. The final papers will come to us this week, I'm sure. And then they'll be signed, and once that's all signed, that'll be posted on the website. I noticed one of the questions, I'll go to your last question first. What's in the LDA? That'll be posted on the website, I'm sure, within a few weeks, so you'll be able to read that. The city website, I assume, Steve?
Yes, it will be on city website.
So basically where all the other documents on the port will be. So you'll be able to look at that and read it in great detail. But the basic point of what a land disposition agreement is it basically outlines the structure of the agreement between my firm and the city. It outlines things like it designates the parcel, the appraised purchase price, land periods, periods of time that we have to do certain things, reverter clauses if we don't do certain things, it goes back to the city, those kinds of things. So you'll all be able to take a look at that, download the document, and read it in great detail. So that process is going on. We're basically in the funding process right now. We're doing fundraising. We're also doing design. The fundraising and design process is going to continue on throughout the rest of this year. We intend to be under construction about this time next year, sometime May, June, July kind of time frame next year. Construction of a building that we have proposed is probably an 18 to 24 month period. We've built them faster than that. I don't want to do that again. That's a lot of work and hard to do. We want to take it a little slower on this one. So that's the quick answer on the schedule. The program of the building has not changed at all. It's the same building we've been talking about with the hotel, the parcel 1 Northeast, which is at the corner of Corrigan and North River, overlooking the marina site that's under construction now. Still talking about the same hotel, condos on top, spa on the bottom, coffee shop, those kinds of things, restaurant. No changes there. So let me dive into the questions here. Number one, the question about the height. Are we willing to consider a 4-story structure on parcel 1? We have considered that. We looked at it. If you've been to any of my meetings that we had all last summer, the primary trade-off we have to consider is we went through the whole process of looking at all the different communities that were suggested, Skaneateles, Sackett's Harbor, on and on, Chautauqua, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and the quality of upstate New York architecture, the stone, the brick, the natural materials that we talked about. You can't have those materials on a low building. That's why you often see that the low apartment-style buildings have cheaper materials, and they don't look so great after 5 years. So as we've talked about in the previous meetings, the trade-off with the quality is I have to be able to go to the higher building to be able to pay for the lower stories. So a 4-story building is not economically viable for the type of building we want to build in terms of quality. In March of 2012, the zoning was changed and the Marina District was Edgewater or Edgemere, part of that process. Edgemere was not involved in that process at all. My firm was a consultant to the city as a technical resource on the development of that zoning parcel. It was written primarily by the zoning office, and we basically provided technical detail in terms of all the graphics. And interestingly, how that process comes together. A form-based zoning code, if you're not familiar with that, a regular zoning code says you're allowed to do a certain type of development within a certain box. And that's how we get things like, I'll just pick on Walgreens or McDonald's, where you get the kind of sprawl type development that you're used to seeing out in suburbs. The form-based zoning code is much more prescriptive. It says you must do certain things of certain kinds of materials in certain places. So it has build-to lines so that you get the kind of development like you have at Mr. Dominic's, and those kinds of places where you've got a nice consistent street front edge that we want to have. So we were involved in that process, and some of the things that we were involved in specifically, one of the early comments from somebody in the city was, in the office was, they wanted to legislate an Art Deco architectural style. And I thought that was not the most appropriate thing to do. The more appropriate thing to do was to require certain types of details, certain kinds of materials, and not legislative style, because I don't know about you, but I didn't think an Art Deco style made any sense up here. It makes sense in South Beach, Miami. So that was our role, was kind of providing technical input on those things. I'll come back to that a little bit more when we talk about the project review committee. Are we willing to work with the Community Design Center on the Charlotte and the Shred? Sure, absolutely. I think I talked to Roger today. I think his initial intent was to look at the area down by the old port, about the train station, certainly all that area. I certainly think the area west of Lake makes a ton of sense to look at over time. I don't think it makes sense, and I wouldn't support relooking at the site. We're working on that process. Has been worked on for the last 8 to 10 years. The city's got a process that they've gone through. What we're doing now is implementing the result of that. And one thing I would encourage you, when you do your charrette, what you want to end up with is something that's implementable. You want to be able to lead, it needs to lead to something that you can build. It's easy to draw pictures of things that you would love to have that might not be economically viable, and so that you'll want to use that as you do the charrette. Focus on making sure that it leads to a buildable project. So I think that's something I would encourage. Let's see, I'm sorry, number 4. Are we willing to allow the community to be part of the process to make aesthetic changes, look at the building, and how can you be more involved? Absolutely, I want involvement. We're not going to vote on paint colors and things like that, but we will be providing some more opportunities for feedback. Let me actually jump down a little bit and respond to the question about what we're doing with the Project Review Committee, and also how we're addressing the zoning deviations. So the zoning variations that we're talking about are interesting because, so the form-based zoning code is prescriptive in that it says, what it's trying to say is we want a good building. Nobody wants another green building like the one up on the hill, right? The big tall monster that looks bland and blank. And so it says things like, you must have a certain percentage of windows, and you must have certain setbacks and all these other things. And if you were at any of the meetings I talked about from a design perspective, it says, you know, it requires a lot of things that, remember that picture of Pearl Street with the 2-story facades and mixed facades. So you want to do all those things, but when you find that you actually try to build a building, sometimes you find that the exact math equations mean that I have to have so many windows that I can't have any kitchen cabinets now because of the way it works. So when we've gone through the process of putting together the design, we presented it to the Project Review Committee. I'll actually read a comment that they had. So for example, upper floor transparency must be between 25 and 50% of the facade. It says the north and south elevations don't meet that requirement. And that's a factual response to our design. What the Project Review Committee said was the scale and massing of upper portion building is more important than strict adherence to absolute numbers in the code. Proposed design successfully does this. Additional use of balconies, they're up around the corners, would improve this more. So the point being is we're responding to the intent of the code, but we might find that the numbers don't add up every time. And that's the point of the Project Review Committee, which is a city group that advises Mitch Rowe and his department. And it's a number of independent architects from across the city. Roger Brown is one of them. And so they look at that and say, you know, we make a proposal that might propose a revision. We do it for a good reason because we think, one, for example, another one that says the floor plan should be smaller. Well, we made the floor plan a little bit bigger, a higher percentage. It requires 40%. We went to 49. That allowed us to knock stories off the building because that was a comment we heard from the community, is make it smaller. So what we said is, well, the north face of the building pushes towards the parking lot. That's not a pedestrian zone, so let's push a little that way so we can respond to the community that way. Another one would be the required build-to line, for example. On North River, there's a curved edge, of course, right? Because there's that curving road. Well, the zoning code would require us to build a curved face of the building, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in a modern sense, but have you ever seen a curved building in any of those communities in Skinny Atlas? There's nothing in upstate New York classic architecture that would have a curved building facade like that. So when we propose a building that's more responsive to the vernacular architecture, you know, that's a response that the Project Review Committee says that's a deviation from the code. That's a positive thing because it's responsive to these comments. So that's the process that we're going through. So what we're going to present to the Project Review Committee on Wednesday is the building that you've seen before. We modified it, and what they asked us to do is to actually take a step back from the pretty drawings and go back to some massing models, which is what the architects like to look at. They want to look at whites and grays and just look at the mass of the building, and if I were to show it to you, you'd wonder why we're going backwards. I will show those things to you later when they're all put together, so we responded to their comments, we made changes to the floor plans, and we'll be presenting a revised version of the last building. And then we said, let's take a whole other look at the building based on trying to eliminate as many of the potential variances that we talked about. And what does that look like? And we're trying to make it a good building, but it's a different one, so it has fewer of the variations, and that means some different pieces. So we're actually presenting 2 buildings and then sort of 2.5, because there's another variation. They actually propose that we go back to a narrower building that gets taller. So we're presenting 2 or even 3 variations on the building of the project review committee to get their feedback. When we've got their feedback, we'll come back to you guys in a few weeks. I'm not sure exactly when, we'll have to look at the schedule, to say here's what we heard, here's what the committee gave us, here's how that led to a direction, and get your feedback on what you think. So we're trying very hard to be responsive to these things, but I think as you'll find is, like in anything, if you've got this sort of a code, there's always going to be give and take, and I could make a building that's exactly responsive to the code that you would probably like a lot less than what we're coming up with. So that's the direction we're going there. Plenty of other things. We're, some specific comments about ramps, moving those, removing dumpsters, all those kinds of things. So. What am I doing? Sorry, I don't need to.
Oh, you
Okay.
doing fine.
Okay. Oh, okay. I'll keep going. Okay. Okay, all right. Okay. I'm going to jump to, oh, I missed this one. How is the project capturing the historical significance of the Charlotte neighborhood? We're still early in that process, but we're clearly focusing on kind of recapturing the golden age of the resort here, the Coney Island of the West. Basically, you really have a great history here with the carousel, the Denso carousel, and all these other elements that were here. We want to tie those things back in. We also want to look at the steel, iron, foundry, mill, those different pieces, and tie those things together. We don't have a tremendous amount of detail on that, but that's the direction we're heading. We're continually working on that. So we'll have more detail on that as we get into it. Right now, again, we'll focus on the mass and the form. Once we get that nailed down, we'll start to dive back into the detail there. How familiar are we with the documented, this is on soil conditions. How familiar are we with the documented research on the soil conditions? What are our plans to address community concerns about the safety and additional cost of building a 10-story building on poor soil on parcel 1? Certainly we're aware that the soils are poor. We've known that. Most of our projects are built on riverfront environments. Almost all riverfront environments have the same kind of natural geological evolution. This is not a unique site for us. This is not something we haven't dealt with before. We have a lot of detail in it. We're certainly comfortable in that environment. Our building we built in St. Joseph, Michigan is a larger building, a taller building. It's built on piles that go down 120 feet, which is about double what we anticipate here. That's a building that was built completely with our private money. We're completely comfortable with the geotechnical solutions that we know we're going to have to face here. It's just a deep foundation site, as are nearly all riverfront sites. I will point out some things. The canyon wall, Mr. Brown, you're here somewhere. There you are. And frankly, I appreciate your level of input because it helps us.
I would hope so.
I don't want it to fall over either. That would be a bad day for me too. I would really not. I'd show up in my review. So,
I would think so.
Anyway, one, the city is not going to, if I have a problem with the cost of the building, the city is not going to pay for it. I assure you, Steve Golding does not have a pile of money back there that he's going to pay for it. So the city's not going to come to our rescue if we have a problem there. This is not going to happen. In terms of where that canyon wall is, that canyon wall is east of the site. It's actually closer to under the terminal building and on the east side of the marina than where our site is. Certainly the northeast corner does dip down lower. We don't actually have to go to bedrock. You can go to, I've got to record, I'm not a geotechnical engineer, but I had to make the joke about a Holiday Inn, but I won't do that. But the geotechnical engineers that we're working with have looked at it. The boring closest to the project development shows a depth of 23 to 49 feet below the surface layer, a very dense glacial till, which is basically material overridden and highly compressed by the glacial action. Similar glacial till was encountered in the test borings, blah, blah, blah. Bottom line is the building code allowed the use of presumptive bearing pressures of 10 tons per square foot on glacial till, which is not bedrock. It's basically consolidated soils of 8 tons, and basically what he stated here is depending on the column loads, either dense soil or bedrock could provide bearing capable of supporting the building. So we appreciate
What are you
that.
quoting from?
This is from Jeff Netzbond, who's a geotechnical engineer.
On what document?
This is a comment he made in response to some of the questions, so it's not a...
So it's outside the geotechnical report.
It's basically, I asked him to look at it and give me some feedback. So this is an email from...
He didn't specify specific boring reports then, examples.
I can go back into that, but I don't have all the detail for you tonight.
All right. Well, you also mentioned that you thought that the bedrock was shallow. Is that correct?
It varies. It's 30 to 60 feet places, and it's deeper than in other places. What I'm telling you is you don't actually have to go necessarily to bedrock with all the columns. So.
Yeah, but you need reasonable till. And
Sure.
The business about consolidated till is not true based on all of the boring tests that are out there. You can read the boring test as well as I can. Mark Greger was referring to a 55 to 60 foot depth of bedrock, okay, in regards to the site you're building on. That particular test is right along Lake Avenue, all right? It's not anywhere near where you have to build the building. Where you have to build the building, there are 4 boring tests. 2 of them go down only 30 feet because they wanted to determine whether or not they could dig that deep in regards to the basin, all right? The other 2 are much less than that, and they did not go to put bedrock. Right now, there's no good information that tell you exactly where the bedrock is, where you're building your building. Now, I would think, again, you said you're using some of my stuff to learn, all right? If I were building a $21 million building, I'd first want to know where the bedrock is, especially in this case because in regards to a gorge, if you go out and Google information, and this is where I got it, okay? So I don't want to mess you up.
Could I, let me make a suggestion.
Sure.
This is a discussion that you really need to have with Greg. And, you know, we don't need...
Well, wait a second. Here's, let me finish.
You're not, understand me. This is not the forum for a full discussion of the geology of the site with Greg, with everybody here. He's invited you. He's invited you to talk with him and bring your data.
Actually, I believe I set the ground rules earlier. If Greg can finish speaking, actually your time is up, respectfully, and I want to open it up. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but not that much. We only have a few minutes. We have about 8 minutes, so, you know, and we have, out of respect for everybody's time, everyone's going to be, you know, timed for 2 minutes. So,
But he hasn't addressed the other questions yet.
One point.
yes, Mr. DiPaolo.
Bill was very clear a couple of weeks ago when we had this informational meeting. He's got a book this thick, okay? And it wasn't blank paper. Yet not one person from your company or the city of Rochester or anybody else involved in the project was at the meeting, the informational meeting that we had. So you're standing here telling us that you have all this information, yet no one has actually sat down. You want us to stand here and listen. You say, this isn't the forum. Well, the forum was 2 weeks ago. Not one of them came to the meeting when we had the forum. So when are we supposed to do this?
What I'm trying to say is there's not enough time for a full discussion that Bill was starting. I'm saying that at some point, this meeting has many questions, and to go into the depth that Bill was starting to go into, I said, wait a minute here. That's the type of thing that you have one meeting and you only discuss the geology.
We had a meeting and they didn't show up.
Let me correct you. Tim Hubbard was there, okay, but he never spoke up.
Okay, I'm going to take back this meeting. I apologize, but Greg kindly asked for 15 minutes on the agenda. We allowed that. The conversations are going to continue to happen. I understand that this is a hotbed issue. The concerns that our community has are going to be continued concerns, and we need to acknowledge them, recognize them, but also we have to move on to the regularly scheduled agenda. Bill, if you can finish up so we can allow for other questions, that would be greatly appreciated. And you've already used up your 2 minutes, so if you could just, 10 seconds, Bill.
10 seconds.
So we can go on to other community questions, because we have about 5 minutes
It
now.
might take me 15 seconds, all right?
12.
We're negotiating here. Quickly, all right. The point has been made several times by Mark Greger that this is just like every other site around the country in regards to waterfront development. I love Google because it answers all my questions in regards to the business that I'm in, all right? I use Mr. Greger's waterfront development site or gorge with waterfront development site. And you can go through the first 5 pages, you probably can go to the first 15 or 20 or 100 pages. And you can't find a waterfront site that's built on the side of a gorge. They're all on the terraces of rivers. The terraces are flat, solid land, like everything that's south of the river. My 12 seconds.
Thank you, Bill.
I want to answer.
Yes.
All right. I'll make my one response to Bill is simple. My geotechnical engineer is competent, and I am confident in him, and the costs are mine, not the city's or yours. So we'll continue on at a later time on that. You asked the other 2 questions. Sorry, where'd they go? I want to get those. What funding sources have we secured? We have private equity funding. We have EB-5 funding in process. We'll be securing a bridge loan funding, which covers the time period that it takes to close the EB-5 funding from when the process starts to when the funding is through. And then we'll have additional partners along the way with other general limited partners. It's too early to have a tremendous amount of detail on that. Ultimately, when you read the LDA, it requires us to provide a certain amount of information for that. When you see the LDA, you'll see that and the deadlines for that, and that's later on in the spring. So I don't have a tremendous amount of detail on that, but it's the same kind of funding we've been talking about. And
But no one was getting EB-5 funding.
we're getting EB-5 funding every day. I have more funding on another project in New York City. Sure it is. So anyway, so some questions. And that was the quick answer. The LDA will be posted.
And
Not a
bear in mind,
question,
you have 2 minutes. Sorry, Tom.
not a question, but a comment. I asked Bill Brown before the meeting if he was a professional engineer, a licensed PE. He said no. I assume you employ licensed professional engineers. I know the city has licensed professional engineers.
Yes.
Mr. Brown offered thoughtful opinion on the geology. Professional engineers have a responsibility for a true position on the engineering.
Our engineer's livelihood depends on his stamp, and if he were making something up, he'd lose his license, he'd lose his job, all those things.
Claire, do I have a chance to ask a question, please?
Yes, Suzanne.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne Phillips, I live on Beach Avenue. Regarding your comment, yes, the city does have professional engineers. However, they have neglected to do the adequate boring tests that are needed. And I cannot imagine anyone going in to work on that site with all the information that has been presented, not by an engineer, but by a distinguished professor of geology. If you go to his website in Geneseo, Dr. Richard Young, you read down and you will see a list like this of his qualifications to make an assessment of that soil. And I will take his word over any engineer any day of the week.
Thank you. We had somebody on the right, and I apologize. Is it Mary Jo? Mary Ann.
Excuse me, can you tell me if there's going to be any type of public you'll be receiving either from the city, the state of New York, or any HUD money, anything that will be supporting this, any taxpayer dollars that would be supporting your interest in the project?
No, there is, the only thing, we are looking at a tax abatement for the homeowners, which will help increase the rate of sales. That's a period of time that's over a 10-year descending period. Other than that, there's no low-income housing, there's none of that kind of stuff. The city is responsible, as is outlined in the LDA, for the public space in between the sites, which is important because that's always, again, continually proving that that site is owned by the city. We will never have the right to close it or take it over or anything. Obviously, the marina construction is a public project as well.
We have room in the agenda for 2 more questions. Make sure that Mary Ellen Van Auker can speak for Beatrice Place. Ed Steinberg, I see your hand along with, I believe is that Joe Sirianni? Oh, all right, Mr. Steinberg, and 1 more question after Mr. Steinberg.
I'm one that has very great concern about the viability of the uses here, and many people would say that the funders would not support a project if they had not vetted it themselves, which brings up a couple of questions, Craig. One is the EB5 program has already rewarded its investors when they come on board for a project such as this. Their profitability of the project therefore becomes secondary in importance and makes me worry further. The other question or comment I have is that would Edgewater continue to be an owner of the land and the structures on the land after they're in place to show that they have skin in the game for that reason? And thirdly, and you, this is a personal question that you can avoid if you like, can you tell us any assurances of your financial commitment to this project personally?
Sure. So the first question on the EB5 investment, that's a portion of the investment. It's maybe half. Obviously, they want their investment back. The green card is one piece of it, but they expect to get their investment back, so they do have a vested interest in the success of the project. Also, with the success of the project, if the project doesn't create the jobs, they don't get what they came for in the first place. So it's the success of the project is absolutely critical to them as much as it is to me. So,
Well, the project represents that there will be jobs, but the investors don't have to provide the jobs.
no, for them, there's actually an audit, and the jobs actually have to be created, or the green cards don't get issued. So the project has to be a success. They can't just send in the money and they're done. The project has to get built. Those jobs have to be created. There's a jobs buffer. So, for example, if we said it was going to create 300 jobs, or let's say use 100 jobs, we would only take investors based off of 80 or 75 jobs because you have a buffer in case that it doesn't create as many jobs as you anticipated. Once the construction is complete and the jobs have been created and documented, you can actually then allow additional investment to cover that. So it has to succeed for them to get what they want. So that's a little more detail on that. Second question, I totally lost it. I'm sorry.
Will Edgewater continue to own the property after
Sure.
the project is complete? For how long?
That's a good question. We'll certainly have involvement for an extended period of time. We own projects for as long as 10 or 20 years. Sometimes we sell them earlier. It varies from project to project. But clearly when we sell a condominium to somebody, they own it. I don't own that anymore. We have the hotel. If a hotel operator buys the hotel from us, I wouldn't continue to own that necessarily.
So are you saying you don't have a plan to continue to own the project after it's complete?
I would say it's going to vary depending on the project, but I don't think we'd own it for 100 years necessarily.
No, but would you own the 10?
Probably, yeah.
Couldn't you commit to that?
I'm not going to commit to it because it varies every day. If somebody comes in and makes me an amazing offer, I'm going to sell it to them. So your third question? The first one. Well, I mean, I guess ultimately I've already, my partner and I have already invested more than $200,000 into this process of our own money. That's money out of my pocket, my partner's pocket personally. There's no, we have additional investors outside of that are funding the next steps in the process. So that's money that we're spending now today. So it's going to be much more than that over time.
Alex, I saw your hand. You're the last question. We have to move on to the next agenda item. So Alex, do you have
Yeah.
something to add to our
Yeah, what I
meeting?
want to know is how many jobs are you looking this project to create?
We haven't completed the job study for this one yet, but the project that we have in St. Joseph, which is about 40% larger, created 487 jobs. So as we go through the job study process, which we'll be completing in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have a firm number on that.
Then how can you be soliciting for EB5 money if you don't know the number of jobs?
We're not soliciting for it yet. We're in the process. What you do in the process is there's a number of documentation that's required by the SEC. It's all SEC controlled like any other investment. And so we have to go through all those steps. Those steps are commencing now. And so over the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have what's called the private placement memorandum, the job study, and all these things that document it all to the satisfaction of the SEC. And then we're allowed to formally go out on the street. That will go out to investors probably in July or August. So that the formal answer to your question is that's in process. That was my last question. I do have one closing comment on construction of the marina. I hope you've all been able to go take a look at it. I talked to some of the contractors today. They're making tremendous progress. They're currently pulling out about 4,000 cubic yards of soil a day. Their initial early estimates were that they'd be able to take out 4,000 cubic yards per week. So they're moving very quickly. They've got a new dewatering technique, which is a very simple one, which is how we typically do our internal basin construction. It's basically a simple trench. You let the water go to the trench and you pump it out. So with 2 pumps, they're making great progress, and we're very pleased with Crane Hogan. I think you're going to see tremendous progress this summer, and I think by the end of summer you're going to see water and hopefully some docks. So it's looking good.